Beaten to Death is a brand new 2023 Australian horror thriller, and it is about a man who, when we find him, is being beaten to death. He is able to escape this predicament, but then gets himself in another predicament. So that's what I will say about that. So now this film is being labeled as like hardcore and violent as all hell and this and that. For us horror fanatics, us, you know, gore hounds, for us that are very conditioned to this kind of stuff, you're not going to see anything here that you're going to remember as like overtly memorable and crazy graphic or anything. I think for the common everyday viewer, this would definitely be too much for them to handle. For us seasoned veterans, there's not really a lot going on here. I would say this is like a violent, visceral film on a budget, because a lot of what we are seeing is implied and therefore not really seeing. But I don't want to make it seem like the film doesn't have brutality to it, and that when you are assessing the film for what it is, the story that's being told, the way that it's being told, it is a violent downer of a film. So overall, I like the film okay. Like, you really, it's just a bummer of a movie for sure. It's definitely a downer, and that's what they're going for. It's really just a guy who's being abused throughout an entire film, but he's not just. It's not like he's tied to a table and being tortured for an hour and a half, but he is a very tortured character throughout, right? He is in misery pretty much. No, he's in misery 99% of the film. We get some flashbacks where he's not, but for the rest of the film, he is in misery. But if you were to take a film like Revenge, which is about the girl who's with the rich guy, and then the friend rapes her, and then she gets left for dead, and she's like fighting her way back and killing her oppressors and whatever. That's a violent movie. That's more violent than this movie. As far as like actual on-screen graphic violence, that is way more hardcore than this film is. And I did not see that label on that one as much as I have on this one. So that's kind of weird and surprising to me. I think it's just the overall tone of this film. It is a super downer of a film. And because this is a guy who just never catches a break for even a second, I could see that. But I don't want anyone going into this thinking it's going to be, some uber memorable, super violent film. It's not. It is a film that deals with brutality. It deals with tougher themes, but a lot of it is implied. The acting in this is good. The look of the film is very washed out, kind of like sun bleached, which we're dealing with a lot of sunlight exposure and being out in the Australian outback. So it makes sense aesthetically. So I thought that looked fine, although it never really adds much appeal to the aesthetic, right? Even though it does fit the film, it's not a pretty movie. It's not good to look at. So it feels overexposed, and I know that's a style choice, and it is on purpose because of the environment. But that being said, I still think it's a fairly ugly film. But it is an ugly film, so it's a weird critique. It's not really a critique. I'm just giving my opinion on it. So anyway, I think that if you're somebody who is sensitive to violence, then yeah, this is definitely not going to be a thing for you. But if you're also somebody on the other side of that who's like, I like really hardcore movies, I think you'll be disappointed. So who is this movie really for? It's not marketed for the squeamish, right? And it's also not going to be marketed for marketable for hardcore horror fans that are used to insane levels of gore and violence. Um, so I don't know, but if I just look at the film on its own merits as a movie, the storytelling is interesting because it's told non-linear, which I thought was good for the character and his story, because we get to know bits about him and we are being told the story out of order. It does leave some intrigue and some mystery as opposed to just telling it straight. Um, but because of that, we are thrown straight into it and we have to learn to care later. And maybe that's something that can take you out of it because you need to establish a character before you throw them into the chaos so that you care about them. But I don't really have a huge issue with the structure of the film. I just do think that might work to its detriment to a degree, because you, in order to watch someone go through this kind of abuse and care, you want to like them. Um, but yeah, it very much is a downer of a film that is primarily just a guy being abused, and being in peril and being in misery for an hour and a half. So I can absolutely see why this would be too much for some people, but for someone like me, it's not all that graphic. It's not all that crazy, and so I found myself just kind of okay on it. I was just watching it like, okay, I'm kind of into this, or sort of, but not really. Like, it's not something that's going to make my year end list. It's not something that's going to be all that memorable to me. But it's not a bad film. I think it's good. I think it's fine. But I just think for the kind of film it's trying to be, I think it's unsuccessful. I guess that's what I'm getting at. Because this film is trying to be hardcore, and I don't find it to be, I guess I would say that that is a failure. So, is the film achieving what it set out to? I don't think so. I don't think so. And I don't think they had the budget to achieve what they wanted to, because this film should be way more graphic. You should have much more like on screen brutal kills with insane violence if you want that kind of visceral reaction from your audience. And you're just not getting it here. So anytime I ever see those claims of, oh my God, this movie's so hardcore, I always do have to go into it with a bit of reservation, saying, okay, to who? To the casual audience? To the casual audience, Fight Club is super violent. I had a client say that to me once. They were like, oh my God, you don't think Fight Club's violent? What are you, crazy? And I'm like, I mean, it has violence, but my benchmark for violence is not yours, right? So you see a guy getting hit and it feels more like impactful because of the blood, because of the bruising, because of the sound and the weight of the fists on the flesh. That all seems very violent to you because you're used to watching Marvel movies or something where, these gods are punching each other right and left through buildings and no one has a scratch on them, and the punches are very cartoonish. But when it's more visceral, when it's more realistic, and it's portrayed in that way, people are like, oh my God, and they cover their eyes and they get so immersed in the violence that they think they're seeing things that they're not seeing. And so that makes the overall experience of the film seem way more than it actually is. I've had people claim that Halloween is gory. Talk to people who saw it in theaters and they're like, oh my God, it was the goriest film I ever saw. There's no gore in the film. It's just all implication. It's all off screen. It's all, just there for the viewer's imagination. And with this film, there are some things shown, and there's some cool, clever little techniques with certain things that I was like, okay, that's kind of cool. But yeah, when I compare this to actually violent, graphic films that have tons and tons of gore, this is nowhere near the conversation. This is not in the conversation. So that's all. So, anyways, all right, guys.